Hey guys, welcome back. Sorry it's been a minute. I did this a couple days ago and I read for about 2 hours and then all of a sudden the recording just stopped and it was nowhere to be found. So let's try this again. Right, so Sherman versus Emory is where we left off. Several pages are going to be missing as usual. John Davis replies to the Honorable Sherman's latest letter on finance. Since the days of John Brown, Kansas has never ceased to be the stamping ground of reform. Ushered into statehood on the eve of a terrible civil war, her baptism in blood fitted her particularly for the growth of liberty and equality. Never since the days of John Brown have the liberty-loving men of Kansas ceased in their determination to hallow the soil made sacred by the life and death of their illustrious martyr. That soil, harrowed by the intelligence of truth-loving men and fertilized by the blood of thousands of patriotic soldiers, was well fitted to receive the seed of historic truth embodied in 7 financial conspiracies, and when in the campaign of 1888, 50,000 copies of the little book were scattered broadcast over the state. The enemies of freedom, seeing that it would yield an everlasting harvest to liberty, rushed forth and attempted to destroy the sower of that seed. Preparatory to their onslaught, their chief met in council and evolved 2 monumental documents which were launched upon the public under the capacity of Messrs. Addy and Kelly. Again, in the campaign of 1891, when 10,000 of these little messengers were scattered over Ohio, the book and its author were again assailed. The veritable John Sherman, whose villainous acts had made possible such a record of crime induced by the solitude of his political friends, came out with an open letter published in the Cincinnati Enquirer and addressed to Chas. F. Stokely of Canton, Ohio, in which he denounces the book as wild and visionary. Can't you see from old school to new school, nothing changes, guys? And declares that the Shylock, to which the author alludes, is a phantom of her imagination. Anti-Semite! The documents of Addy and Kelly, as also the letter of Senator Sherman, were immediately met by the indomitable John Davis through the columns of his paper, the Junction City, Kansas Tribune. These replies of Mr. Davis are so replete with historic truth that we present the one in reply to Senator Sherman for the consideration of our readers. It reads, "A few years ago, Mr. S.E.V. Emory of Michigan emptied a quiver of arrows into the ranks of the people's enemies. The dart seemed light and feathery, and the bowstrings was drawn by the weak arm of a woman. Yet the shafts were winged and pointed with the truth and justice, and the woman's arm was nerved with an earnest patriotism. Very soon the wounded birds began to flutter, and the broken wings were trailing in the dust." In the year 1888, 50,000 copies of Miss Emory's little book were showered among the people of Kansas. Under their fructifying influence, the seeds of thought began to spring up in every heart. The rage of the enemy knew no bounds. Great lawyers and judges of courts wrote pamphlets and newspaper broadsides which were circulated by Republican committees and corporation newspapers as campaign documents. Smaller men called the little book the Union Labor Bible. Isn't that funny? So if you want to get voted in as judge or lawyer or whatnot, just pretend you're for the people. Nothing changes. They cursed it in their speeches, tore it to pieces in the presence of their audiences, dashed it to the floor, spat upon it, trampled it underfoot. All this but proved the rage of the lion that had been wounded, the pain of the whale that was pierced, or the bird that was hit. Next comes the emptying of another quiver of shafts by the same arm that showered Kansas, this time further east, and promptly is produced the same results. A senator of the United States from Ohio deems it worth his while to confess the pain of the arrow in his breast by review of the situation in the usual corporation attorney style. In the usual corporation attorney style. A copy of that review is before me over the name of John Sherman. I beg to quote and discuss portions of it. Mansfield, Ohio, October 12, 1891. Mr. Charles F. Stokely, Canton, Ohio. My dear Sir, yours of the 8th, accompanied by Miss S.E.V. Emory's pamphlet called 7 Financial Conspiracies Which Have Enslaved the American People, is received. Some time since this wild and visionary book was sent to me, and I read it with both amusement and astonishment that anyone could read it with approval or be deceived by its falsehoods. The 7 financial conspiracies are the 7 great pillars of our financial credit, the 7 great financial measures by which the government was saved from the perils of war and by which the United States has become the most flourishing and prosperous nation in the world. The first chapter attributes the Civil War to an infamous plot of capitalists to absorb the wealth of the country at the expense of the people, when all the world knows that the Civil War was organized by slaveholders to destroy the national government and to set up a slaveholding confederacy in the South upon its ruins. The Shylock, described by Miss Emery, is a phantom of her imagination. The Shylocks of the war were the men who furnished the means to carry on the government and to put down the rebellion, and included in their number the most patriotic citizens of the northern states. Guys, who furnished the means to carry on the government? You mean who furnished the means to carry on the war? Who, uniting their means with the services and sacrifices of our soldiers, uniting their means for our soldiers, come on guys, put down the rebellion, abolished slavery, and preserved and strengthened our government. You mean they really fought down the national government? The first of her conspiracies she calls the Exception Clause, in the Act of February 25th, 1862, by which the duties on imported goods were required to be paid in coin in order to provide the means to pay the interest on our bonds in coin. This clause had not only the cordial support of Secretary Chase, kind of like J.P. Morgan Chase, but of President Lincoln, and proved to be the most important financial aid of the government devised during the war. This exception clause saved our public credit by making a market for our bonds, and was paid by foreigners for the privilege of entering our markets. Like most men with a bad case on hand, the senator appears to have little regard for truth, and sets out with a misstatement. Miss Emery's book does not attribute the Civil War to an infamous plot of capitalists, etc. The book plainly states, page 11, that African slavery was the cause of secession and consequent war. Miss Emery and the senator agree as to the cause of the Civil War, and both state it plainly in their own words, about which there can be no disagreement. Miss Emery then takes the ground that the great capitalists were pleased with the opportunity to speculate on the needs of the country, and that they proceeded to profit by the situation, as we shall see in the course of this discussion. The little book uses plain language to suit the plain common people, and hence calls the London and Wall Street speculators Shylocks. This the senator condemns, saying that the Shylocks of the war were the men who furnished the means to carry on the government, etc., as above quoted. In this matter, Miss Emery is in good company. She agrees with Thaddeus Stevens, Senator Wilson, Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson, Senator Benton, and others in calling men and things by their proper names. Guys, but this will appear more plainly in the course of the discussion. I now call attention to the senator's remarks concerning the first financial conspiracy. Fortunately, we are not left in the dark as to the cause. That's 74, and that's 76. 76, 75, okay. Causes and agencies which place the exception clause on the greenback. Prominent actors in the matter have left their words and acts on record. The legal tender bill was introduced in the House by E.G. Spalding of Buffalo, New York, chairman of the Subcommittee of Ways and Means, December 31st, 1861. It was discussed in the House and perfected until February 6, 1862. And perfected. Legalese, guys. Would you know what that means? It passed the House by a vote of 93 to 59. It provided for a full legal tender money with no exception clauses. With no exception clauses, guys. After passing the House, the legal tender bill went to the Senate. The Senate amended the bill by providing that the contemplated money should be legal tender for all purposes except duties on imports and interest on the public debt. Miss Emery claims that those exceptions were the work of the bankers. That is, we are all debtors. They bankrupted the Republic, and now we're in a corporate United States where you are the debt, the public debt. Miss Emery claims before we were all on coin. Ms. Emery claims that those exceptions were the work of the bankers. Mr. Stevens, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the grand old commoner from Pennsylvania, tells how the crime of wounding the greenbacks was committed. Testimony of Thaddeus Stevens. Mr. Speaker, I have very few words to say. I approach the subject with more depression of spirit than I ever approached any question. No personal motive influenced me. I hope not, at least. I have a melancholy foreboding that we are about to consummate a cunningly devised scheme which will carry great injury and great loss to all classes of people throughout this Union, except one. With my colleague, I believe that no act of legislation was ever hailed with as much delight throughout the length and breadth of this Union, by every class of people without exception, as the bill which we passed and sent to Senate. Congratulations from all classes, merchants, traders, manufacturers, mechanics, and laborers, poured in upon us from all quarters. The boards of the trade from Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Louisville, St. Louis, Chicago, and Milwaukee approved its provisions and urged its passage as it was. I have dispatched from the Chamber of Commerce, Cincinnati, sent to the Treasurer, and by him to me, urging the speedy passage of the bill as it passed the House. It is true there was a doleful sound come up from the caverns of bullion brokers and from the salons of the associated banks. Their cashiers and agents were soon on the ground and persuaded the Senate, with but little deliberation, to mangle and destroy what it had cost the House months to digest. So their cashiers and their agents, i.e. lobbyists, okay, they fell upon the bill in hot haste, and so disfigured and deformed it that its father would not know it. Instead of being a beneficent and invigorating measure, it is positively mischievous. It has all the bad qualities which its enemies charged on the original bill, and none of its benefits. It now creates money, and by its very terms declares it a depreciated currency. It makes two classes of money, one for banks and brokers, and another for the people. It discriminates between the rights of different classes of creditors, allowing the capitalist to demand gold, and compelling the ordinary lender of money on individual security to receive notes, which the government had proposally discredited. All classes of people shall take these legal tender notes at par for every article of trade or contract, unless they have money enough to buy United States bonds, and then they shall be paid in gold. Who is that favored class? Well, the banks and the brokers, and nobody else. This is from a speech in the House on February 20th, 1862. That is the statement of the chairman of the committee that originated the bill. He and Miss Emery agree that the brokers and bankers are responsible for the exception clause that depreciated the greenback money. Senator Sherman says it is one of the greatest pillars of our financial credit. Testimony of Henry Wilson. It is a contest between the brokers, jobbers, and money changers on the one side and the people of the United States on the other. I venture to express the opinion that 90, 76, 78, we're missing page 77. Currency. In the minority, we find Vallandigham, Voorhees, Pendleton, William H. English, and S.S. Cox. Vallandigham of Ohio was very empathetic in his denunciation of legal tender paper. He said, "Cheap immaterials, easy of issue, worked by steam, signed by machinery, there will be no end to the legion of paper devils which shall pour forth from the loins of the Secretary." Vallandigham insisted that these notes were not money, that they would not circulate as money. Though you should send them forth bearing 10 times the image and superscription, the fair face, and from the Abraham Lincoln, now president, do you notice? Check this out. The fair face and form of, all caps, Abraham Lincoln, now president and Caesar of the American Republic. I'm sure this was after they got to him. I utterly deny, sir, the right of the federal government to provide a paper currency intended primarily to circulate as money and meet the demands of business and commercial transactions, and to the exclusion of all other paper. But when the bill was returned from the Senate, mutilated and depreciated by the infamous exception clause, Vallandigham, Voorhees, Cox, Pendleton, English, et hoc, genus 𝚤, voting for the mutilated bill authorizing a crippled and depreciated money. They did not agree with Secretary Chase, Wilson, Stevens, Hale, and Windom, those great and noble patriots who tried to give the country a legal tender money without any mutilation and exceptions. And as these men who have been styled traitors voted in the House, so voted John Sherman in the Senate. Neither Sherman, Vallandigham, nor Voorhees agreed with Secretary Chase, Wilson, Stevens, Hale, Windom, and all those great and noble patriots who tried to give to the country a legal tender without any mutilations and exceptions. See Spaulding History, 1869. The object of the exception clause on the greenback was to cause its depreciation so that the holders of gold could buy up the currency at half price and then invest it in the bonds at face value. Senator Sherman himself once explained the whole matter in a single sentence. He said, "It became necessary to depreciate the notes in order to create a market for the bonds." That is, the great rich men, whom Thomas Jefferson called the traitorous class, would not invest in the bonds unless they could double their money by doing so. Having beaten the government in the exception clause fight, which Mr. Stevens called the first victory of money power over the country, the Shylocks determined to take further advantage of the necessities of the government and the exigencies of the times. So in 1863, they procured the passage of the National Banking Law. Under this law, the bondholders could place the bonds, which had cost them about 50 cents on the dollar, in the United States Treasury without sacrificing any of the interest income. Interest income. Okay, guys, that's what income is. It's money earned off of interest. Income is money earned off of interest. Okay? Capital is money earned from labor. Capital is money earned from labor. Okay, so let's look at the money man's games. Check out the money man's games. The interest income. Okay, so you pay an income tax. What interest do you have that you're paying income on? And receive back 90% of the bonds in bank currency to loan to the people as bankers. This gave the bankers 2 interest incomes from one investment. With $50,000 in gold, they could become the happy owners of $100,000 of interest-bearing bonds and $90,000 worth of currency, all free from taxes, under state and local authority. This was a big bonanza, or in fact, 2 bonanzas combined. This law was passed during one of the darkest periods of the war, when patriots, statesmen, generals, soldiers, and people were straining every nerve to save the country. It pounced upon its prey like a panther when the victim was bleeding at every pore. Moulton's History of American Finances, page 131, states the case as follows. Mr. Sherman now introduced the National Bank Bill. After a lengthy debate, it passed the Senate by a vote of 23 to 21. In the meantime, there had been several bills for the same purpose introduced and referred to the committee in the House. When the Senate bill came down, it was not referred, as usual, but brought before the House without consideration in committee with other similar bills. Again, without consideration. Legalese, would you know? It was not discussed in committee of the whole, but under a motion to refer, which cut off all amendments, the friends of the bill debated its general merits. When the parliamentary tactics, it was forced to finally, when by parliamentary tactics, it was forced to a final vote. It passed under the gag rule of the previous question by a vote of 78 to 64. See, guys, freedom's scary because the law is dangerous. They make it up as they go. They're literally magic money men sitting there making up the rules as they go. And thus was fulfilled the predictions of Senator 𝙲𝚘𝚗𝚂, when on the victory of President Jackson over the United States Bank, Benton said that Jackson had beaten the bank, yet the bank power was not conquered, but, like a royal tiger, driven to the jungles. He will return again. He returned in 1863 to prey upon the prostrate form of a bleeding republic. What? It's not a threat to our democracy? What democracy? The democracy that came from the bleeding republic. when neither President, Congress, nor people had the power to resist his coming. With 3,000 whelps and an aggregate capital of $700 million, much of it furnished by the government, this royal tiger had been for 25 years preying upon the fortunes and liberties of the people through this system of legalized robbery. Yep, guys. 7 times the people of the United States have voted on this national bank question at presidential elections. 5 times out of the 7 they declared by their votes that a national bank is unconstitutional and dangerous to liberty. Dangerous. Freedom is scary because the law is dangerous, y'all. What? That sentiment was a regular plank in Democratic platforms prior to 1860, and 5 times that platform was approved by the people at the presidential elections. Peter Cooper tells us that in 1793, President Washington signed a resolution of the American Senate declaring that a holder of bank stock should not have a seat in Congress. Washington signed a resolution. Okay, 1793. Bank stock should not have a seat in Congress. Well, Mr. President, bank stock took over your Congress. And when John Quincy Adams was elected to, oh gosh, did we miss another one? 80, okay. 81. And when John Quincy Adams was elected to Congress, he refused to qualify until he had disposed of his bank stock. And yet Senator Sherman is in favor of the national banking system, and his party regularly send to the United States Senate numerous bank presidents, just as if this great country has no other interest worth attention except stock gambling, coupon clipping, and usury collecting. Nope, and look what it did, and look what it got us. Babylon. No, Gomorrah, Sodom and Gomorrah, that's what it is, Sodom and Gomorrah. Gave us Sodom and Gomorrah. You want to know what was going on then? Just look around, you guys. And at this moment, the President of the United States Senate is not only a banker, but a British banker. Told y'all. So if the British bankers are taking over Congress, why don't you think that they would make laws to create a bar system? A bar system that comes from the British Crown Court, the Temple Bar, doing business in London as Morton, Rowe and Company. And further, should President Harrison die, we would have a London banker as President of the United States. We already do, guys. Come on. Verily, Thomas Jefferson was right when he said, banking institutions are more dangerous than standing armies. The exception clause in the Greenback Bill and the national banking law are all the conspiracies mentioned in Miss Emery's book that were enacted during the administration of President Lincoln. Yeah. Do you also know other things? President Lincoln was a lawyer. He was a lawyer. You want to know he took on a client? He took on a client of, I believe, Jewish ancestry. And he won for this client. But the client, still being Jewish, said, boy, you done screwed up. And Lincoln said, what? I won for you. What are you talking about? I screwed up. And he was like, oh, no. You won for me, but you done screwed up for yourself, bro. You don't know about them money, man, do you? You don't know about them Shylock. They coming for your ass. They coming for your ass. So, by coming for his ass, he enacted it during his administration. I have shown that they were perpetrated by the money power while, I have shown that they were perpetrated by the money power while Mr. Lincoln and the country were so terribly pressed by the exigencies of the war that Mr. Lincoln had no option or responsibility in the matter. Oh, he was pressurized just like that dang Ford. Pressure. These Shylocks, they'll do that, man. They do that. They ain't got no qualms. And we can all clearly see that as of 2025. As of October 7th, 2024, but specifically now in 2025. Anyway, again, remember we've discussed this, the 1040 bond, the 40 that you file for your taxes. The tax is your income on the interest. What interest do you have on the interest of America? Your 1040 bond was a war bond enacted by Lincoln. Just for the war. Just temporarily for the war. And how many hundred years later, guys, and we still got the income tax, the 1040 bond. Anywho. All right, Mr. Lincoln had no option or responsibility in the matter. He submitted to them under coercion. Yep, he approved them to placate one enemy while he battled with another. Yep, that's what they do. That is their perfection. They are on all sides while screwing you in the middle. Being unable, as he himself said, that's the Hegelian dialectic, the proper one. They got you from every corner. There is no actual conversation happening. There's no actual debate. It's called the Hegelian dialectic for a reason. Being unable, as he himself said, on one occasion to fight two wars at once, he submitted to the inevitable, as Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Henry, and other champions of liberty in their day submitted to the existence of slavery and the slave trade, because there was no other alternative. Oh,